Well, we're going to kick things off here with a discussion on HDR and taking a look at the HDR features in CS5 because really it's one of the biggest features inside of Photoshop CS5. And I'm going to try not to get too philosophical on the whole HDR thing here and try to just stick with the facts. However, there are a couple things I want to say as we start here. If you're not sure what HDR is, I'm going to tell you about it in just a second. If you kind of know what HDR is, it elicits a lot of emotion from people, okay? And most of the people it elicits really strong emotions from are people that don't like it. So I'm going to ask you to just keep an open mind about it and kind of just listen to the things I have to say as we go along with this. And you know, not necessarily that I'll change your mind, but at least that you'll kind of just consider it. So take a look at the images that we're going to work on in this lesson here. And, you know, why would we do this? HDR, high dynamic range. That's what we're shooting for. We're trying to get the range that we just can't see when that our camera, I shouldn't say that we can't see. We can see the range. Our camera can't see it. So if you look at these three photos, when I was out there that morning, the sky did indeed look like that, but nothing else did. But this is what my camera sees. Now, the trees in the foreground and everything, they were all pretty bright. Okay, so they looked like this image over here, but the sky and nothing else looked like this. And then over here, everything that's kind of back this way, well, that kind of looked like that when I was there. All right, this is a little darker than it was when I was there, and this is kind of brighter than it was when I was there. But my eyes pick up on all these things our cameras cannot, which is where HDR comes in, because you can use it to combine all these things together, to take these three images, combine them together to give you one, what they call high dynamic range image. Now, you've probably seen, if you've paid attention to HDR in the last couple of years, you've probably seen lots of different styles of HDR. There's over the top where it looks like a surrealistic painting, and then it almost looks like a fantasy world. And then there's a more natural version of it, which puts all these three together to kind of give me a more balanced photo, and it keeps me from having to do the work of grabbing the sky and grabbing the foreground and doing all that and matching all that inside of Photoshop, because we could do it. And we would want to do it because none of these photos represents what was really there. However, that takes a little bit of work. Okay, so this makes a really interesting example. Just behind the scenes, I got up in the morning when I was visiting there. It's been shot a million times, I know, but I got up in the morning. I'm like, hey, I'm going to go get this great shot, the fog, maybe with the top of the bridge through, or some great sunrise clouds. And I got clouds, but I got more than I bargained for. But as you'll see here, it actually makes a very good demonstration of some of the things that we can do in HDR, okay? So I've got these three photos open inside of Bridge. I could easily just select all three of them, just click on one, shift click on the others, Tools, go down to Photoshop, and then go to Merge to HDR Pro. If you're already inside Photoshop, well then you could come up here to the File menu, go down to Automate, and you could go to Merge to HDR Pro, okay? Which, by the way, HDR is not new to Photoshop. Okay, HDR has been around for a while. It's the Pro version that's new to Photoshop. Okay, the previous version wasn't so good. We used to use a third-party program called Photomatics. Okay, but what's happened inside of CS5 can actually take the place of Photomatics. It's good now. Okay, all right. So we have our three photos here. So if I just select these three, I hit open. We want to attempt to automatically align source images, and just in case there was any bit of a shift when all three of these were being taken, that's always a good option to choose. But the software, you know, it's Photoshop CS5 is going to take about a minute or so here to actually render and bring everything together about these images to get us into the HDR dialog box. And now that it's there, let's go ahead and just kind of resize a little bit here. Let's take a look at really what's happened, because in and of itself, it's not like a wow image, okay? So we have to get it there, all right? It's a little bit anticlimactic at first, but the first thing you can do is come up here. There's a bunch of presets, things like that. And in fact, I mean, let's just go a few of them. Let's go to monochromatic. Okay, and you can see what that does. It makes some pretty good black and whites. There's photorealistic, which is more of a kind of a balanced image. And then there is surrealistic, which gets kind of crazy. Okay, what I'm going to suggest you do is give a try, especially for this example here. Start with surrealistic. Grab that preset. It's just the beginning. I don't want my image to look like this, but remember, it's just the beginning. Okay, let's go through the settings and start to reel things in so it looks better. All right, so we have edge glow. All right, this is probably one of the main areas inside of this dialog box. Edge glow and tone and detail are going to be where we spend most of our time. But take a look. Radius essentially says, all right, there is this HDR effect. That's the best way I can explain it is the effect. It's this contrasty, grungy type of an effect. When you bring radius all the way down, well, you're taking that effect away. When you start to increase the radius, you're adding that effect. All right. And you can see, you take a look at the clouds. They're a really good example of what starts to happen when I have it down low. When I start to bring it up high, you see how everything gets really contrasty. I kind of like, especially for clouds, I kind of like it somewhere in the middle to lower end over here. Now the strength setting. The strength setting says, okay, so there's this effect up here. Well, the strength is, how contrasty do you really make this effect? So at a very low setting, it's not very contrasty at all. It's almost like a flat gray image. But as you start to increase it, you'll start to see more and more contrast. Now you got to be careful because as you add more contrast, you add more glow around any contrasty areas where it goes from light color into a dark color, something like that. So you got to be careful. You got to kind of balance these things. Look for the effect. If you do want the real glowy effect, that's fine, but just know that that's what you're going for. Okay. Personally, I kind of try to avoid the glows. So we'll get in here and we'll bring up our radius and see if we can just smooth some of these things out a little bit. Okay, and that's pretty close. Still a little bit of glow around here, but I think we're working toward a pretty good spot here. Gamma is midtones. Okay, you can think of it as best way to do it. Let's bring it all the way over to the left. What happens is we have an extreme contrast here. All right, it's giving us blacks to whites. All right, really, really dark to really, really bright. But as I start to increase the gamma settings, all right, you're going to see all that really, really dark and really, really light go to more of a flat kind of an image, okay? Where the things that are here in our midtones and the things that are here in our brights and our darks really starts to all kind of go together, okay? And that's almost kind of one of the effects of HDRs. We're really bringing out the shadows and we're really bringing out a lot of what's in the highlights. Okay, and before we go too far, as we go through these settings, just keep in mind there is a post process to what we're doing here. We are by no means done. This is almost like camera raw for HDR, okay? Because we are going to go into camera raw when we're done with this and really finish things up. But anyway, so we've got our gamma setting here, and you could see again, really, really contrasty to more of a flat image, but still bringing out lots of details in the shadowy, darker areas and lots of details in the highlight areas like up here in the sky. Exposure, overall brightness, and it's not something I do too much in here, and you're going to see why in a minute because we can really come in and tweak this after this whole HDR dialog as well. But exposure is going to increase the overall brightness of the image. Detail is it's kind of like clarity inside of Lightroom or Camera Raw if you've used that before. It's going to affect. Let's take it all the way down. Look at the details. Look at the areas over here. So it's going to affect the sharpness and the contrastiness of the appearance of some of the detailed areas. All right, so you're really going to see it in the grass and in the trees and things like that. As I start to increase it, a lot of times I like a very, very high setting for this. Okay, this gives us a really nice effect and really brings out the details very nicely. All right, so shadow and highlight are actually very simple. Shadow brings out the shadow areas. Highlight adjusts the highlight areas. So take a look inside these trees. Take a look down here, some darker areas. As I increase shadow, see what happens? Let's bring it all the way down and then all the way up. All right, you see we're just bringing out some of those shadowy areas. And again, that's kind of characteristic of HDR is to really bring the shadows out. However, if you wanted to look a little bit more realistic, you wouldn't bring the shadows out too much. You try to maintain some of that where there is darks and there is lights. We know that. We just don't want the dark areas to be really bright. And then the highlights is the same thing. So as I really increase the highlights, we're just attacking the highlight areas. Do you want to make the highlight areas brighter or do you want to make the highlight areas darker? And you'll see it working up here in the clouds. Vibrance and saturation, very much like we have in Camera Raw and Lightroom. Vibrance is going to just kind of target some of the colors that need a little bit of a color boost, whereas saturation, it's just really going to just kind of, really saturate most of the colors in the image. So typically I like a little bit more vibrance than I do saturation. The curve. The curve is, it's just like a curve in Photoshop. The main thing I'll do with it is I'll do that traditional S curve. I'll bring a point down here in the lower left-hand corner and then a point up here toward the upper right, and that just gives me a nice amount of contrast in the image, and it's just that traditional S curve. However, you can get crazy with this thing. I mean, there's nothing saying that you just can't just tweak this curve until it's got all kinds of funky, weird, wacky stuff going on. Okay, so there's no governing body that says that you can't do these things. It's just, what are you looking for? Are you looking for the really surreal, kind of crazy, grungy style, or are you looking to kind of just pull back a little and maybe just add some contrast? Okay, either way is fine. Just kind of understand, where it's leaning toward. All right, so that kind of takes care of the settings. As far as some of the settings up top here, remove ghosts are kind of smooth, milky areas. You're going to see it with trees, and CS5 is actually really good at this. You're going to see it with trees, whereas if you had trees that might have had a little movement, removing ghost is going to take care of that movement and kind of snap it and maybe try to take the best of one of the photos where the tree isn't moving so much and use that as its source. So it works great with trees. You'll see down here in the water, a little bit of a smooth, milky, because there's waves crashing, and I'm taking multiple exposures here. Okay, so obviously the waves are going to be at a different place, but if I choose remove ghosts, it kind of just, give it a second to render, it kind of just goes in there, and you can see it just kind of picks one, and it just makes it a little bit sharper instead of having that smoother type of effect with it. So water, things like that, images where people might have been walking through, give it a try on, and images of trees. Okay, it works really, really good around the edges of those trees or anything that might have just been moving a little bit inside of your photo. As far as mode goes, we want to stick with 16-bit because that's what we can work with pretty much the best in Photoshop. And then as far as the 4 settings here, just ignore the other 3. They're useless. We're not going to use them. You're only going to use local adaptation here. Okay, so that takes care of the dialogue. What you can do is if you came up with a group of settings that you really like, you can click on the little pop-out menu here. You can save it as a preset, and then that way you could always call it up later on when you came back into the dialogue. But at this point, remember, this is only phase 1. We're going to click OK, and this is going to create a file that we can actually work with inside of Photoshop, because at this point, you can't do anything with this photo, okay? It's inside this dialog box, and that's where the image actually lives until you get to the point where now we can move over into Photoshop. Then it kind of becomes a regular image, and now we can do all the things that we would normally do in Photoshop to finish the image. And I'll just give you a couple examples here. We've got, I'll take the spot healing brush, and we've got spots, okay? Well, you think about, a spot on your sensor for one photo is bad. A spot on your sensor when it mashes 3 photos together, it's going to be that much worse. So we can come in here and get rid of spots. There's a tiny little thing right on the water over there. If we wanted to, we could just give it a try on that really bright spot, and that didn't work. So we'll zoom in a little bit and take my clone stamp tool and just come in here, and that little bright spot over there was just kind of bugging me. So if I take my clone stamp, I should be able to get pretty, not so bad, but get in there. And if I wanted to do a little bit detailed work, I'll zoom out so you can't see it at all. And then, anything else, sharpening. So retouching, we just did some of that, but removing distractions, anything like that. I'll duplicate the layer, and we'll do our sharpening on a separate layer here. Go down to unsharp mask, and I'm really going to crank the daylights out of the sharpening. I want you to be able to see it in the video here, because I always know it's just a little bit harder to see in video. Take a look, before, after. So we're able to do sharpening. The key here is it all starts in the HDR dialog. When you're done, you're going to come over into Photoshop and you're going to finish the image. Anything you want to do, dodging, burning, removing distractions, cloning, healing, all those different things, sharpening, finishing the image, any special effects, they all get done right here inside of Photoshop. Okay, now I do want to say that this is just scratching the surface, because this isn't the HDR power session. This is the CS5 power session. We're kind of just covering the HDR feature. If you like this stuff, I go way more in depth to it. Keep an eye on kelbytraining.com. I'm doing a class called Mastering HDR Photography in Photoshop CS5. So we'll take a look at all the other things that you can do with HDR and lots of different examples and whatnot. But hopefully this at least kind of whets your appetite for some of the things that you can do with the new HDR in CS5.